Once upon a time, there was a powerful Roman Empire. Then, after a long time of prosperity, the western half fell. The eastern half survived for a long time afterwards and never really fell. However, quite a few people say Rome fell in 476, since that's when a Germanic tribe, the Visigoths, sacked Rome and took over. I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's back up a few years and take a look at what happened before all of this. In the 3rd century, there was a crisis. A bad crisis. Lots of economic, military, governmental problems. I could keep on going. And it looked like Rome was going to fall. However, a superhero named Diocletian came. He took power in 284 AD and saved Rome from complete and utter destruction. For a lot of Rome's height, Germanic tribesmen, aka barbarians, have always been at the border attacking. Rome's army was able to keep off the tribesmen, but as Rome became less and less powerful, the tribes were able to start winning battle. 3 times the city of Rome was sacked before a tribe leader finally took over Rome and carved out his own empire. While all this was happening, different tribes carved out their own kingdoms in the Western Empire. I'm probably saying too much already, so I'll stop giving the overview and let the other sections explain everything in more detail to why the western half fell.
Several things that impacted the fall of the Western Roman Empire were related to things going on in the government and the economy. Because of the continued threat of the barbarians, increased and extremely expensive trade in the East, and the unavailability of new resources, the Roman Empire was running out of money. To compensate for their lack of money, they raised taxes. When they raised taxes, the people lost money. When the people lost money, Rome had to make more money, which subsequently lost value. When the money lost value, Rome was still poor and needed more money, so they had to raise the taxes again, and so on. This cycle continued for some time, even though eventually a man named Diocletian became emperor of Rome and made several reforms. Diocletian's reforms were designed to address the needs of the Roman Empire, even though they unfortunately led to some problems of their own. Because of the previous near fall of the Roman Empire, they needed a much more efficient government. To deal with this, Diocletian split the empire into an eastern and a western half, although they were still to be one empire. The Roman Empire needed a more stable government where the leaders weren't still in constant danger. So, Diocletian split the civil and military offices so that the bureaucrats would have less power and the military leaders were loyal to the emperor, not the bureaucrats. He then made the divisions of the army commanded by generals smaller so they would hold less power. Later, he made an extremely elaborate court and palace, also giving the emperor a semi-divine status to make the citizens in awe of the emperor, so they were also less likely to want or to be able to kill him. All these things were extremely expensive, which caused a whole new cycle of money problems for the Western Roman Empire. When the government raised taxes, people ran away from their jobs, and this caused them to be tied into their jobs. Unfortunately, this only caused them to want to work less, and thus the tax base became lower and taxes had to be raised again, and so on. That, combined with the fact that the east and west halves of the empire grew farther apart and were functioning as separate empires, and the empire was incompetent because the Germanic mercenaries refused to cooperate with the Roman soldiers, led to the decay of the Western Roman Empire.
The Roman army's failure was a major cause of the decimation of Western Rome and the decline of Eastern Rome. The military was an integral part of Roman culture and civilization from its beginning, since it was the reason Rome became such a large empire. However, as soon as Rome stopped conquering other lands, the army became mostly useless, and there was no longer a regular flow of resources from newly conquered lands. This meant that emperors were no longer able to pay the army as much as the soldiers would have wanted. This obviously fostered ill will towards the empire, which meant that many generals would rise up and take over the empire. The true decline of Rome's army's quality began during this period where emperors constantly switched out. This was the 3rd century. The majority of these short-term emperors were generals that took over Rome using their armies. Additionally, to add on to the chaos of the emperor switching, the population began to decline quickly in the 3rd century because of disease. Diocletian was able to stave off the demise of the Roman Empire when he came into power in 284. He split the Roman Empire into two parts, the western and eastern halves. Taking after the olden emperors of Rome, Diocletian surrounded himself with oriental pomp to make himself seem like he was divine. This would have made the army more likely to serve him, thinking that they were serving a divine being instead of an ordinary general. He also separated military and civil support to further avoid any revolts. As soon as Diocletian gave up power to raise cabbages, his elaborate system of passing on the power of emperor failed, and Constantine came into power. Rome still remained divided, and Constantine took over the eastern half. Constantine pushed the idea that he was supported by the Christian God, and since the armies believed he was supported by a divine entity, their uprisings became less frequent. The government became stable in the eastern province. Unfortunately, once Constantine died, he left his empire to his sons, who began to quarrel amongst themselves, starting civil wars and weakening the Roman armies. Meanwhile, the Roman army had become more and more integrated with barbarians, since the general population of Rome kept on shrinking. The fighting style of the army had become less efficient and less weapons were involved. When Constantine's sons began to quarrel, the western side of Rome had lost control of their local officials, who were wildly corrupt, and their army had deteriorated in quality so much that the German barbarians were able to take over and divide the land amongst themselves.
Due to the lack of soldiers because of depopulation, Western Rome had no more defense on the frontiers. This lack of defenders made Western Rome susceptible to barbarian invasion. Barbarian is a word used to describe the various tribes or Germanic tribesmen in the north and east of the Western Roman Empire. These tribesmen repeatedly attacked the borders of the Roman Empire. To fix their lack of soldiers, the Romans started recruiting Germanic tribesmen into their armies. They even allowed some of the tribes within their borders to settle. This didn't actually help, as the soldiers weren't that well trained and could not understand Roman strategy. Therefore, they were worse than the true Roman soldiers. This is why Rome became increasingly unable to keep a good army. The recruited soldiers, or foederati, had very simple weapons and almost no armor. They also had no proper training. The foederati had become a major part of the Roman army, often demanding more money or trying to get their leaders to a higher status. Eventually, the foederati became the majority of the Roman army. The Romans tried to remove the foederati from the army. They did so at a time that made them vulnerable to invasion. Two of the tribes, the Vandals and the Visigoths, both attacked the capital, Rome, and succeeded in sacking it. Rome suffered from many other attacks and eventually ceased to exist. In the end, Rome was captured by Odoacer in 476, and that is the widely accepted date of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. During and before the time of the Roman Empire, there were other empires, like Han China and the Persian Empire. These empires fell, sometimes for the same reason that Western Rome did. Persia was weakened from within, and the provincial governors gained too much power and revolted. The same thing happened to China with its bureaucrats. Similar trends can be found in Rome.
The Eastern Roman Empire didn't fall, but the western half did. Internal governmental problems such as the bureaucracy getting out of control was an issue. This led to even more problems like the economic ones with taxes and devalued coins. Because the empire didn't have money, that led to even more problems. The army couldn't be paid, so the strength of it decreased tremendously as people quit. More problems arose from that because the barbarians could now beat the Romans in battle. They were also implemented into the army. Essentially, it became a big cycle of problems. The western half was weaker than the eastern half overall, so they were the side to fall. That is why the western half of the Roman Empire fell.